And these three aspects deeply influence how each of us think, act, and react in the world out there. And it also helps clarify some common misconceptions that exist, okay? First of all, I think we'll all agree that there are universal characteristics, which means irrespective of which country you belong to, as human beings, we have certain characteristics that are common. And examples of these are our survival instinct, in danger, the fight or flight response, a huge range of emotions which only humans are able to experience and express. Those are universal, okay? It exists everywhere. And then people will often argue, but no, I'm unique. I'm different from this person. And that's true. Two people are not really exactly the same. We all develop an individual personality, which is a result of our own life journey and the experiences that we've had. And even siblings from the same family don't always turn out with the exact same personality. These What that actually does is it creates a variable. It makes it sometimes complex and challenging for us to work at an individual level with somebody else. If you're working with hundreds of people, it's hardly practical for you to know each one's preferences, each one's background, and how to adapt to them, right? So national culture actually comes into play here because the country that somebody was born and raised in, or at least the country where they spent their formative years, let's say the first 10 or 12 years, has played a huge role in shaping how they think, act, and react in the society. And in the context of culture, we're always careful not to stereotype and say that everybody in India is a certain way, or everybody in the US is a certain way, or every German is the same. We can't do that. But in national culture, there are certain common themes that bring and bind people together. So most people, most of the time, belonging to a certain country or a certain culture, tend to prefer to do things in a certain way. And how we've acquired this culture is really through a lot of conditioning, which has happened to us from the time we were born, through our families, through our friends, our education systems. And what this has done to us day in and day out at a very subconscious level is that it's told us how to develop a view of the world and how to see it. So we all see the world with lenses that were made by the country that we live in, right? And so this is true for somebody else in another country. And then when you're looking at the same thing, like a frog or a horse, or maybe some people saw a snake or a cow, I'm not sure, but we look at the same situation, but with different sets of lenses. And then that's where the story of the misunderstandings begin. Okay, so let's get a little bit deeper into that as we move forward today. What does intelligence mean then in the context of culture? So, the ability to really start to recognize, to notice that there are so many cultural nuances that I'm seeing when I work cross border. My French manager doesn't appreciate me when I do something, but when something goes wrong, he's immediately quick to criticize. Or my US counterpart is always interrupting meetings, she always has so much to say. Or in India, the manager walks into the room and suddenly the air changes and the teams become quiet, etc. Right? We notice these things, we sometimes don't make much of it. But these are small cultural nuances that have a deeper underlying meaning. So the first thing is the ability to start recognizing, identifying, and accepting those. And then it's not an excuse, right? The last thing we want is for cultural differences to become an excuse for someone to just say, this is what it is, right? What we want people to be able to do is move to the next level and say, now, how can we develop culturally sensitive strategies so we can overcome these problems? And I think what all of us need to accept is that multicultural teams are actually a strength. Just imagine the power of those diverse perspectives and diverse experiences and how that can actually aid in creating a world-class team. All right. So that's what cultural intelligence is. And so why should you care? Because organizations, when they miscalculate this aspect, when they overemphasize the importance of technological competence, processes, tools, systems, resources, and all of that, but then they kind of keep cultural awareness, emotional intelligence, etc., as an afterthought, then what tends to happen is in the process there's loss of trust, not just amongst team members and internally, but also with clients and stakeholders. There's also employee frustration. People leave if they feel this is not an environment that they can cope with. And a global business culture, we really believe that the biggest problem with cultural missteps is very costly delays. And I can't emphasize the impact of that as much, but it's really, imagine you do not consider cultural differences and you go all out to do something, it fails, then you realize you need to have taken culture into account and you now have to redo everything. If that means from hiring to onboarding to setting up your processes and everything, rebuild the trust that you lost, rebuild the employee satisfaction, by which time people have probably left and now you have to start the cycle all over again. That's why we say that's costly delays, okay? Extremely costly. So this is why it matters, and this is why organizations need to consider cultural intelligence while they are preparing either to set up GCCs in India or for acquiring companies from other countries or to work or set up new locations in new parts of the world. Okay, right. So what do we do? How do we decode this? We like to call this the dilemmas of life. And the reason for choosing the word dilemmas is because there is no right and wrong. It's really just different perspectives of how different societies have decided to deal with these problems. Okay, so there are about 6 different dilemmas I'm going to show you now. How should we distribute power? What is more important, the individual or the group? What is more motivating? Is it achievement or the quality of life? How should we handle uncertainty, things that we didn't expect? How should we handle time? And what do we do with our impulses and desires? How much should we indulge? Okay. And imagine every society, every culture in the world has decided to address this differently from one another. Okay. And so that results in the differences in expectations, the differences in the preferences, the styles, the way we see things, the way we perceive things, and vice versa. We're referencing Professor Gert Hofstede's cultural dimensions here. It's regularly updated, extremely valid, and a lot of organizations refer to cultural dimensions because it helps to compare and contrast the countries in question that someone might be interested in. So these 6 dilemmas have 6 names as national cultural values. For today's purpose, we're only going to talk about one because that's all the time we have for it, okay? So let's consider power distance because this one's particularly relevant